Few phrases associated with Kierkegaard are more widely used and more widely misunderstood than the leap of faith. In popular culture, the phrase is often taken to mean believing something without evidence, embracing optimism in the face of uncertainty, or committing emotionally when rational certainty is unavailable. Kierkegaard meant none of these things. The leap of faith is not a slogan. It is not encouragement to be reckless, irrational, or hopeful. Kierkegaard introduces the idea of the leap to describe a structural break between ways of existing, a transition that cannot be smoothed over by reasoning, gradual development, or intellectual persuasion. The leap marks a qualitative change, not a quantitative one. Kierkegaard insists that one does not move into faith by accumulating reasons, arguments, or experiences. Faith does not arise at the end of a chain of reasoning. If it did, it would be an extension of ethics or philosophy. Faith, by contrast, begins where these modes of understanding reach their limit. This is why Kierkegaard speaks of a leap rather than a step. A step implies continuity. A leap implies discontinuity. The leap of faith does not bridge a gap through explanation. It crosses a gap that cannot be bridged at all. What lies on the other side cannot be inferred, predicted, or secured in advance. This is the first major misunderstanding Kierkegaard confronts. The leap of faith is not a decision made under uncertainty after weighing probabilities. It is not a rational gamble. It is not belief chosen because the evidence is inconclusive. Kierkegaard insists that faith does not emerge from calculation, but from confrontation with impossibility. The individual who makes the leap does not do so because faith seems reasonable. They do so because reason has reached its end. This end is not failure, it is limitation. Reason, ethics, and reflection can take the individual to a point of clarity about responsibility, guilt, and selfhood. They cannot take the individual into faith. Faith requires a different kind of commitment altogether. This is why Kierkegaard rejects the idea that faith can be prepared in advance. There is no gradual ascent into belief. One cannot slowly become a believer through refinement or education. The leap is not the culmination of development. It is a rupture with it. Kierkegaard is careful here. The leap does not destroy reason. It does not reject ethics. It does not abandon reflection. It simply refuses to ground existence in them absolutely. Faith does not contradict reason. It transcends its jurisdiction. This distinction matters. Modern interpretations often treat the leap as irrational belief, as choosing to believe despite insufficient evidence. Kierkegaard rejects this framing. Faith is not chosen because evidence is weak. Faith is chosen because evidence, however strong, cannot ground existence itself. The leap is therefore existential, not epistemic. It is not about what one believes to be true. It is about how one exists. The leap marks a shift in orientation, not in opinion. One does not leap into a doctrine. One leaps into a way of standing before existence. This is why Kierkegaard insists that the leap cannot be justified. If it could be justified, it would no longer be a leap. Justification belongs to the ethical and rational sphere. Faith begins precisely where justification ends. The individual who leaps cannot explain why they have done so. They cannot persuade others. They cannot offer reasons that compel assent. They cannot even reassure themselves in advance. The leap is made without guarantees, without proof, and without external confirmation. This is what makes the leap frightening. It strips away the illusion of control. The individual cannot secure themselves through knowledge, morality, or social recognition. They must act without knowing whether what they commit to will make sense. Kierkegaard insists that this fear is not accidental, it is essential. If the leap felt safe, it would not be faith. Faith demands risk, not because risk is admirable, but because absolute commitment without absolute certainty is the structure of faith itself. This is the first thing Kierkegaard wants us to understand. The leap of faith is not a belief chosen under uncertainty. It is a way of existing chosen without justification. Kierkegaard sharpens the idea of the leap by insisting on what it is not, because misunderstanding here collapses the entire concept. The leap of faith is not an emotional impulse, not a moment of enthusiasm, and not a psychological breakthrough. It does not arise from feeling inspired, uplifted, or reassured. In fact, the leap often occurs against feeling. If faith depended on emotion, it would fluctuate with mood. Kierkegaard insists that faith cannot rest on inner states because inner states are unstable. The leap is not a response to confidence, it is a commitment made in the absence of confidence. This is why Kierkegaard distinguishes faith sharply from religious feeling. Religious feeling seeks confirmation. It wants experiences that reassure belief, moments of clarity, peace, or certainty. Kierkegaard treats this desire as a misunderstanding. Faith does not depend on feeling confirmed. It persists without confirmation. The leap is therefore not an inward experience that resolves doubt. It is a decision that accepts doubt as unavoidable. This distinction matters because modern interpretations often psychologize faith. They turn the leap into a therapeutic event, a moment when the individual overcomes anxiety or finds meaning. Kierkegaard rejects this entirely. Faith does not cure anxiety, it coexists with it. The leap is also not a moral decision. One does not leap into faith by becoming more ethical. Ethical life can deepen responsibility, seriousness, and guilt, but it cannot produce faith. Kierkegaard insists that the ethical stage reaches a limit it cannot cross. The leap marks the crossing of that limit. This crossing cannot be gradual. If faith could be approached incrementally, it would remain within the ethical sphere. The leap is required precisely because there is no continuity between ethical responsibility and faith. The individual must abandon the hope that responsibility alone can ground existence. This abandonment is not irresponsibility. The leap does not negate ethical obligation. The individual continues to live ethically. What changes is not behavior, but grounding. The individual no longer expects ethics to provide ultimate justification or reconciliation. Kierkegaard insists that this shift cannot be explained rationally. If the leap could be explained, it would become a conclusion of reasoning rather than a rupture with it. The leap occurs when the individual recognizes that no explanation will suffice. This recognition is not despair, it is clarity. The individual sees that every attempt to secure existence through reason, morality, or reflection ends in insufficiency. The leap is made not out of confusion, but out of lucidity. Faith does not arise from ignorance, it arises from seeing too clearly. This is why Kierkegaard insists that the leap is solitary. No one can leap for another. No one can persuade another to leap. The leap cannot be delegated, inherited, or shared. Each individual stands alone before the decision to commit without justification. This solitude is often misunderstood as arrogance. Kierkegaard insists that it is the opposite. The individual who leaps does not claim superiority. They accept exposure. They accept that they cannot explain themselves or guarantee their choice. This acceptance strips away pretense. The leap does not elevate the individual above others. It removes every external support. The individual no longer stands on explanation, approval, or certainty. They stand without ground. This is why Kierkegaard insists that the leap is not dramatic. It does not announce itself. There is no visible moment of transformation. From the outside, nothing may appear to change at all. The leap alters relation, not appearance. The individual who has leapt does not live in a different world. They live in the same world, under the same conditions, with the same responsibilities. What has changed is how they stand within it. Kierkegaard insists that this inward change cannot be verified. There is no test, no proof, no outward sign that confirms the leap. This lack of verification is not a defect. It is the condition of faith. If faith could be verified, it would no longer require a leap. Kierkegaard now clarifies why the leap of faith cannot be reduced to belief in propositions or doctrines. Faith is not primarily about accepting statements as true. It is about committing oneself in the absence of any final justification. This distinction is crucial because many misunderstandings arise from treating faith as a matter of opinion rather than existence. Doctrinal belief belongs to the realm of knowledge. One can argue for it, dispute it, revise it, or abandon it in light of new reasons. Kierkegaard insists that faith cannot function this way. If faith were simply belief in certain claims about God, then it would remain within the sphere of rational evaluation. The leap would be unnecessary. The leap occurs precisely because belief cannot ground existence. The individual may know doctrines, understand theology, and agree intellectually with religious claims, and still not have faith. Faith begins where agreement ends. It requires the individual to stake their existence, not merely their intellect. This is why Kierkegaard insists that faith is not certainty. Certainty seeks closure. It seeks a point where doubt can be eliminated. Faith accepts that doubt cannot be eliminated and commits anyway. The leap is not made after doubt is resolved, but in full awareness that it will remain. This awareness distinguishes faith from self-deception. The individual who leaps does not pretend that the world suddenly makes sense. They do not imagine that suffering, contradiction, or absurdity disappear. Faith does not reorganize reality to fit belief. It accepts reality as unresolved. This acceptance is difficult. Human beings want coherence. They want their lives to fit into intelligible patterns. Kierkegaard insists that faith refuses this demand. The leap involves relinquishing the expectation that existence must justify itself to human understanding. This relinquishment is not nihilism. The individual does not abandon meaning. They abandon the demand that meaning be accessible on their terms. Faith does not deny reason. It denies reason's sovereignty over existence. Kierkegaard insists that this denial is necessary. As long as the individual demands that existence make sense before they commit to it, they remain trapped in reflection. Reflection can analyze endlessly, but it cannot decide. The leap breaks this paralysis. This is why Kierkegaard describes the leap as decisive. The individual moves from endless consideration to commitment. This movement cannot be mediated by explanation. No argument can compel it. The leap is not forced by logic or evidence. It is chosen. This choice is frightening. The individual gives up the security of justification. They accept that they cannot explain why they have committed themselves in this way. They must live with the possibility of error without retreat. Kierkegaard insists that this risk is not accidental. Faith requires risk because without risk there would be no leap. If the outcome were guaranteed, the movement would not be faith but calculation. The leap demands that the individual entrust themselves without control. This entrustment is not passivity. The individual who leaps does not withdraw from responsibility. They continue to act ethically, think critically, and engage with the world. What they relinquish is the hope that these activities can ground existence absolutely. This grounding is transferred elsewhere, not to certainty, not to doctrine, and not to experience, but to a relation that cannot be made transparent. The leap reorients the individual's entire stance toward existence. Kierkegaard insists that this reorientation cannot be partial. One cannot leap halfway. One cannot reserve justification as a fallback. The leap requires full exposure. The individual stands without guarantees and commits anyway. This is why Kierkegaard insists that the leap is irreversible in structure. One can abandon faith, but one cannot undo the fact that one has leapt. The individual has crossed a threshold that cannot be crossed back in the same way. Existence is now understood differently. This difference does not produce serenity. It produces seriousness. The individual no longer delays commitment in the hope of greater clarity. They accept that clarity is not coming. The leap marks the moment when waiting ends. Kierkegaard insists that this ending is not resignation. It is the beginning of faith. Kierkegaard now confronts one of the most persistent misunderstandings of the leap of faith. The idea that the leap provides meaning in the sense of resolution or harmony. Many assume that once the leap is made, the individual achieves inner peace or existential clarity. Kierkegaard insists that this expectation fundamentally misreads faith. The leap does not resolve contradiction. It commits the individual to living within it. Faith does not dissolve the tension between the finite and the infinite. It intensifies awareness of that tension while refusing to be paralyzed by it. This is why Kierkegaard insists that faith is not consolation. Consolation seeks relief. Faith demands endurance. The individual who leaps does not escape anxiety, guilt, or uncertainty. They accept these as permanent features of existence. What changes is not the presence of tension, but the refusal to let tension prevent commitment. This refusal marks a decisive shift. Before the leap, the individual remains suspended in reflection. They analyze, compare, and postpone, hoping for a final justification that will make commitment safe. Kierkegaard insists that this hope is illusory. Reflection can clarify endlessly, but it cannot conclude. The leap interrupts reflection. It does not answer reflection's questions. It renders them non-decisive. The individual accepts that no further thinking will produce certainty and commits anyway. This interruption is often mistaken for irrationality. Kierkegaard rejects this charge. The leap is not anti-rational. It is post-rational. The individual does not reject reason. They recognize its limits. Faith begins where reason's authority over existence ends. This recognition is deeply unsettling. Modern thought tends to equate legitimacy with justification. If something cannot be justified, it appears arbitrary. Kierkegaard insists that faith cannot meet this demand without ceasing to be faith. The leap embraces responsibility without justification. This responsibility is personal and absolute. The individual cannot appeal to systems, traditions, or explanations to excuse their commitment. They must stand behind it alone. This is why Kierkegaard insists that faith heightens responsibility rather than diminishing it. The leap, therefore, does not liberate the individual from ethical seriousness. It intensifies it. Because the individual cannot justify their stance, they cannot hide behind it. They must live it without defense. Faith does not provide cover, it removes it. Kierkegaard insists that this removal is essential. If faith functioned as an explanation, it would become an escape. The leap ensures that faith remains a burden rather than a refuge. The individual does not transcend existence, they are more deeply implicated in it. This implication reshapes how the individual relates to suffering. Suffering is not reinterpreted as meaningful in advance. It is not explained away as necessary or redemptive. The individual who leaps does not know what suffering means. They endure it without explanation. This endurance is not passive. It is active commitment without understanding. The leap does not promise that suffering will make sense later. It commits the individual to live faithfully, even if it never does. Kierkegaard insists that this stance distinguishes faith from optimism. Optimism expects outcomes. Faith relinquishes expectations. The individual who leaps does not demand that life justify their commitment. They commit without conditions. This unconditionality is what makes the leap radical. The individual no longer says, "I will commit if." They commit without conditions, without guarantees, and without knowing whether their commitment will be vindicated. Kierkegaard insists that this is not recklessness, it is honesty. The leap acknowledges what reflection conceals, that existence cannot be secured. Faith does not pretend otherwise. It commits in full awareness of risk. This awareness produces humility. The individual who leaps does not claim to have found truth in a way that others must accept. They do not assert superiority. They accept exposure. Faith does not elevate the individual above others. It strips them of every defense. This stripping away is why the leap cannot be celebrated. It is not an achievement. It is a burden assumed. Kierkegaard insists that if faith is treated as triumph, it has already been misunderstood. The leap leaves the individual without ground, not because existence has become meaningless, but because grounding existence was never possible to begin with. Faith accepts this reality and commits anyway. This acceptance prepares the final clarification Kierkegaard insists on. The leap of faith does not bring rest. It brings responsibility without resolution. Kierkegaard's final insistence about the leap of faith is the most difficult to accept. The leap does not lead to rest, completion, or resolution. It leads to a way of existing in which uncertainty is no longer treated as a problem to be solved, but as a condition to be lived. This is where many readers resist him. We want the leap to deliver something, reassurance, clarity, or inner peace. Kierkegaard insists that this desire misunderstands faith at a structural level. Faith does not complete existence. It commits the individual to it without guarantees. The leap, therefore, does not end struggle. It transforms its meanings. Before the leap, struggle is experienced as delay. The individual remains suspended in reflection, unable to commit because justification is lacking. After the leap, struggle becomes endurance. The individual commits without justification and lives with the consequences. This shift is decisive. The leap does not eliminate doubt, anxiety, or suffering. It removes the demand that these must be resolved before one can live. Faith does not promise that existence will make sense. It promises only that commitment is possible without sense-making. Kierkegaard insists that this promise is easily misunderstood. The leap is not liberation from responsibility. It is its intensification. Because the individual cannot justify their stance, they cannot hide behind it. They must live it without appeal to explanation, doctrine, or certainty. This makes faith heavier, not lighter. The individual who has leapt cannot say, "I am right." They can only say, "I have committed." Faith does not provide a position of authority. It removes authority altogether. This removal produces humility. The individual who leaps does not claim insight others lack. They do not expect recognition. They do not demand agreement. Faith does not authorize judgment. It exposes the individual to misunderstanding without defense. Kierkegaard insists that this exposure is not accidental. If faith could be defended, it would become ethical or intellectual. The leap ensures that faith remains what it is, an existential commitment that cannot be translated into universal terms. This is why the leap cannot be made on behalf of others. It cannot be inherited, transmitted, or taught. No one can be argued into faith. No one can be carried across the threshold by tradition, culture, or upbringing. Each individual stands alone before the leap. This solitude is frightening. It strips away the comfort of consensus. The individual cannot rely on collective belief to secure their commitment. Faith demands singularity, not as isolation from others, but as responsibility that cannot be shared. Kierkegaard insists that this demand is unavoidable. If faith were collective, it would become ethical or cultural. The leap preserves faith's singularity by refusing to let it dissolve into shared norms. This does not mean that faith rejects community. The individual continues to live ethically among others. They honor obligations, relationships, and responsibilities. What changes is not outward life, but inward grounding. The leap does not produce a new morality. It produces a new way of standing within existence. This standing is marked by seriousness. The individual no longer waits for clarity before acting. They no longer postpone commitment in the hope that reflection will one day conclude. The leap ends waiting. Kierkegaard insists that this ending is not relief, it is burden. The individual accepts that they must live without final answers. They commit without knowing whether their commitment will ever be vindicated. Faith does not promise success, meaning, or understanding. It promises only that commitment is possible. This promise is enough, not because it resolves existence, but because it allows the individual to live without evasion. The leap removes the excuse of waiting. It demands that the individual take responsibility for how they exist now. This demand is why the leap is terrifying. It leaves the individual without ground, without explanation, and without rest. Faith does not offer shelter from existence. It removes every shelter. Kierkegaard insists that this removal is honest. Existence was never secure to begin with. Reflection only disguises this fact. The leap exposes it and commits anyway. This is why Kierkegaard insists that the leap of faith is not irrational belief, emotional enthusiasm, or moral optimism. It is the moment when the individual accepts that existence cannot be justified and lives responsibly in full awareness of that fact. The leap does not make life easier. It makes evasion impossible. And for Kierkegaard, that is the highest seriousness existence can demand.